Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around, we are on the map MP Alpine Ridge, playing as the forces of the High Elves against the forces of the Dawi. So in my opinion, this matchup is probably one of the easiest for the High Elves, one of the worst for the Dwarves. It's actually pretty tough, I think, to build a composition that can counter everything that High Elves can bring to the table. Going into it, I figured the dwarf player has to invest in some anti-large. They're probably going to invest in some artillery, something to shoot down high elf shooting. They're going to have to invest in some heroes. They're going to have to invest in some things to deal with your top tier elite anti infantry units. So I basically overinvested in one thing and one thing only, and that is heavy armor-piercing infantry. It might seem like a bit of overkill, might seem a little gimmicky, but as you can see here, we do have a full front line of White Lions and Swordmasters of Hoeth, which I think are absolutely stellar in this matchup. Now, one of the big things you have to be wary of is the fact that your opponent can sort of chip away at these units with blasting charges. They can definitely whittle you down with focused thunder fire, with Runes of Wrath and Ruin, that sort of stuff. But nonetheless, once you get into close quarters, you can tear through the dwarves in short order. Even thunders really don't have the staying power, or not thunders, hammers don't have the staying power to deal with a horde of swordmasters. Their stats are excellent. Their damage output is huge, and they can honestly, to units like dwarf warriors as well as to units like miners and those sorts of chaff units that block your way, they can tear through them pretty quickly and then push on to the back line. For my lord, I decided to bring Techless, solo pick here. I think he's good in this matchup. You got a net, which can help your units if your opponent is trying to flank you, or trying to harass, or trying to be a nuisance. You got an enfeebling foe to make him a little more vulnerable, and then you do have regrowth to heal critically damaged units up. Unfortunately, here I did forget to remove. Kindle Flame, which is completely useless. But oh well, it is what it is. Definitely. I think Alariel could also be pretty decent, and perhaps would be an equal, if not maybe even better choice in this matchup than Techless, but for old time's sake, I do still run Techless, and I do think he's still a very good choice. Two bolt throwers compose my only ranged contingent, and these guys are there for the ability to shut down gyrocopters, who are really the only major threat to this sort of composition. And honestly, you can't rely on high elf archers. Maybe Illyrian Reavers could do the job, just because you could chip away at the gyrocopters and you don't have to worry about steam guns and stuff like that, but honestly, I found that bolt throwers do pretty well. One of the other units I've thought about using for it is the Phoenix, but the problem is if your opponent has gyrocopters and they're just defending against the rush with mass infantry, they can just fall. If they have gyrocopters and they're, say, hovering over here above the ground, they can then sort of just pull away with their gyrocopters right above their infantry line and snipe you down. Otherwise, they can also sort of split. If they have multiple gyrocopters, they can split off, and your Phoenix is much less effective. So pushing in immediately, you can't see my opponent here deciding. Neither of us decided to seize the ridge. I deployed further back because I was a little worried that if I deployed up here at the front line, my opponent, if he decided to go with a Vanguard build, you can of course see the numbers. And 1100 is, if your opponent brings about 1100 troops, there's a good chance it's a Vanguard build. It's not guaranteed. It can obviously be a normal sort of composition like this one, but there's a good chance it could be a Vanguard build. And I didn't want to have all my melee stacked up right here. To be immediately rushed. Perhaps a little bit of a mistake, honestly. You can usually gap close and crush the units pretty quickly, but I also wanted to have my artillery ready to go. I don't know. Perhaps might have been a little bit of a mistake, but regardless, we are immediately pushing in, seeking to get this hill. I mostly just wanted my artillery to be far enough off to have some time to do its magic. Now for my opponent's build. Pretty competitive, and honestly, one of the builds that this is one of the few builds really that I think this sort of composition will struggle against, and it is a very wide composition. Dwarves struggle to go wide. A lot of these units are not really a particular threat to me, but they are going to present a major roadblock. For his lord, my opponent did just bring a simple dwarf lord. Nothing fancy there, nothing too sneaky. He does have the Star Metal Plate, which debuffs melee attack. He's got Foe Seeker. He does have Stand Your Ground. Otherwise, though, melee attack, melee defense, nothing. He's nothing spectacular. He's a decent lord. That's basically it. He's just tanky. For his front line, a whole bunch of miners with blasting charges who are surprisingly effective against units like Swordmasters of Hoeth, who only have 90 armor and are very tightly packed. They're decent against White Lions, who do have some missile resist, but honestly, they'll still do some good work, so you gotta be wary of that. And then some Dwarf Warriors with Grey Weapons. Now, Dwarf Warriors with Grey Weapons are, in my opinion, a pretty terrible unit. I don't really think they're worth it in many, if any, matchups. And the only benefit they're gonna have here is that they can do a little bit of damage in return to the White Lions. Probably not even the Swordmasters, because the Swordmasters have such high melee defense. Personally, I'm not a big fan of these guys, but my opponent did bring a lot of them, so that definitely it's some AP that I got to be wary of, and it's a front line that's going to be hitting back. Finally, the main shooting contingent, and you can see it's very strong out. We've got 2 Rangers, we've got 2 Thunders, and then 2 Iron Drakes with Troll Hammers. Now, Iron Drakes with Troll Hammers not the most amazing against infantry, but they do some AP damage, and they will definitely sort of do some chip damage over time. They've got explosive shots, and they can definitely be a bit of a nuisance if you can't shut them down. And these Thunders, of course, can whittle down your troops as well. In the back, Dragonback Slayers, as well as Vanilla Slayers, and then some further Miners with blasting charges. So definitely a very competitive backline. Early on, though, there isn't any artillery here, so early on, really, my opponent and I were just posturing at each other, trying to sort of sense each other out, or mostly I was doing some scouting. I pushed Stickless up to the ridge, knowing full well that the Dwarves can't really do much. They can shoot at me, but in the worst case, I just pull back. And so I was basically just keeping tabs on my opponent, trying to push my front line up and working my way forward with the bolt throwers, trying to get them into an overwatch position from which I could rain death and destruction on the Dawi, who did not bring any artillery. So we are going to fast forward here because there isn't really much to see. You can see my opponent here does push forward, perhaps anticipating some sort of gimmicky rush, or not entirely sure what to do. And as we sort of start cresting the ridge, you can see my opponent does start pushing his shooting forward, trying to get some cheeky shots. But I simply wanted to create a bit of a zone down here on the low ground, so that my artillery could take the hill, take the ridge, and start shipping away. So throwing things into fast forward, you can see we do sally forth. My opponent realizes I'm not going to rush down into him. I was still waiting on my artillery here, so we're going to pull back. You can see we're already about 2 minutes into the game. This is a pretty extended bit of foreplay, if you want to call it, or maneuvering and skirmishing. But finally, I do get up into position, and we start wailing away with the bolt throwers. And you can see they're doing pretty well against the tight formations the Dawi have. The scatter shot can do quite a bit of work, and you can see those Thunders already taking about 600 damage from just a few volleys from those bolt throwers. And you can see they're just tearing in, doing quite some damage to these poor stunties, though not taking any model kills. But really, I knew that these were the main targets. The main troublemakers for me would be these Thunderers, and so that was the units I sort of focused on. And you can see we're definitely getting some good value here, even if not the most model kills or the biggest head count. You can see some of those shots completely whiffing, even despite being scatter shot, just not doing that much. But as you can see, we are positioning. I'm rotating my front line, trying to get into an optimal position to push into my opponent's forces, all the while whittling away at this back line with that constant suppressive fire streaming in from the bolt throwers. And it is doing it over time. It does add up. Finally, with my opponent sort of pressing in on me, I do decide to sort of commit, and we are going to start pushing in towards an engagement. Now, there are some Rangers here, but Rangers aren't too much of a threat. Not to Swordmasters, not to White Lions. They don't really do enough damage. And we are sort of able to start gap closing. Now, my opponent here being a little clever, you can see he's pushing forward troops that don't have blasting charges to screen for his miners to buy them the time they need to discharge all their blasting charges. Fortunately, over here, the White Lions do eat most of these blasting charges, which is good because they have the 30% missile resist that does help, whereas the Swordmaster of Hoeth do not. In the meantime, though, we are going to charge in here straight into the jaws of death and destruction where these miners are, and the full charge is going on. I was trying to push into the back line, trying to disrupt the shooting. Very important to try to get these Thunderers offline. We do hit these White Lines with the regrowth, trying to keep them in the fray, and in the meantime, these Swordmaster of Hoeth are just swarming all over these Dwarf Warriors, and they're going to be shutting them down. Unfortunately, these Iron Drakes are able to keep firing, but you can see in the places where the Swordmasters get in there and they're not really being molested, they are tearing through those Dwarf Warriors in a matter of seconds. You can see these guys down to 26 models. They've not killed a single Swordmaster, and the damage is immense. Now, this is really where I think Alarielle would perhaps be more useful than Deckless for this sort of composition, because Alarielle with her big AoE heals, you could possibly get a pocket like this one or a pocket like this one, get multiple units with an Earthblood rather than a single unit with a regrowth. But unfortunately, it is what it is. We have Techless. That's what we're stuck with. In other areas, though, you can see these miners' blasting charges getting torn to shreds by the Pure Main Company. Here, unfortunately, though, big misplay on my part, as I let these Slayers just run straight into my backline. Of course, Slayers being unbreakable do not give a darn if they're being killed and being chopped to death by a bunch of White Lions. I do try to dismount the crews and run away, but Slayers are, of course, too fast. This is a big misplay, honestly. I should have left the unit here in reserve to protect the artillery, to block the Slayers, but instead I'm stuck doing a sort of Benny Hill action, chasing these angry stunties around the map with a bunch of White Lions, which is kind of a disaster for me. And means my two artillery pieces, who are doing great job shutting down this backline, are not going to be able to do so. So my opponent getting huge value of the Slayers here, taking down 1,400 points worth of artillery, as well as another 800 points of White Lions being distracted and not in the fight. That said, looking at the rest of the fight, you can see these Dwarf Warriors with great weapons completely routed. Over here, the Dwarf Warriors getting slaughtered, these miners broken. Over here, these Dwarf Warriors with great weapons getting slaughtered and broken. Techless still very much alive and well. And although the Dragonback Slayers are tying down some white lines over here, we are definitely doing pretty well. Unfortunately, though, some of these Swordmasters definitely getting whittled down. You can see just that focus fire coming in from these Rangers, these Thunders, these Iron Drakes. Just so much overwhelming fire, pinstering my troops and really whittling them down. And you can see the Swordmasters, they're not going to be coming back. They're dead. They're as good as gone. But my opponent is forced to sort of focus these units down one at a time. And in the meantime, we are able to sort of pick apart these troops. We're able to overrun these Dwarf Warriors. And Teclis is still mounted, so he can sort of run amok and do some disruption. In the meantime, over here, the Pure Main Company slaughtering these Dwarf Warriors with ray weapons. The Pure Main Company, despite, honestly, white lines don't have the best of stats in general, they will still do pretty well against cheap crap like that, those troops. Unfortunately, over here, the Swordmaster of Hoth being peppered down from all sides, and 90 armor isn't really enough, especially once you're very tired. You lose about 25% of it, so these guys are right now at about something like, I don't know, 60 to 70 armor. Maybe about 70. So right now they're actually going to take quite a bit of damage from these Rangers. They're not getting that shield bonus. They're not getting that save from the front. And so while they are slaughtering the Thunders, who are a much bigger threat in the long run, it's definitely a bit of a pounding. And these Swordmasters are not going to be able to stay in here forever. They are going to eventually get torn apart. My only hope here was that they would be able to shut down the Thunders and dispatch them. Unfortunately, though, these Dwarf Warriors are being able to push in and sort of pinch the Swordmasters, get some range damage, and definitely a bit of a problem. Unfortunately for my opponent, though, and you can see the balance of power, and this is one thing to keep in mind. You can see the balance of power. You swing decisively out of my favor. If we look at it, it's at this point it's a good probably 60-40, 55-45 in my opponent's favor. I've lost both of my artillery pieces essentially. These last few Slayers still running amok, annihilating my backline, really having done quite a number even on the white lines who've been pursuing them this whole time. Most of my Swordmasters essentially gone. A few units here and there. These ones I did get a regrowth on. And once again, I think this is where Alariel might actually shine. But you can see we weren't able to shut down these Thunders. We got snared by those Dwarf Warriors. And although we do shatter them, the Swordmasters are not going to be long for this world. They themselves are going to get routed. In the meantime, although we are shutting down these Thunders and we're getting rid of these Iron Drakes, still a bit of a nuisance. There's still all this fire. There's still this unit of Thunders on almost full ammo with still half their models left. These Rangers over here still very healthy. So definitely some rough stuff. Finally do give up on chasing those Thunders and turn around, pivoting to go after those Thunders. But here's the thing. As you can see, the balance of power is all of a sudden shifting back in my favor. And this is because a lot of times with these sorts of heavy rush builds, initially the engagements will not favor you. You're going to get destroyed. I lost a massive chunk of very high-end troops trying to push through a very cheap and trash front line. Those miners with blasting charges basically cost nothing. Those Dwarf Warriors cost a minimum. But now, as the fight is breaking down, as the fight is becoming a slugfest in the backline, as my opponent is not able to escape, even his Rangers are not really fast enough, much less his Thunders, who are only at 28 speed, his other troops, once the Iron Drake's at, I think, 26, these units are not going to be able to escape, and now we are going to be able to sort of slaughter this backline. And you can see the pursuit just going on all over the place. These Rangers running out of ammo, these Thunders barely being blocked for by these miners. Granted, these Swordmasters are probably going to go down in the process because these miners are rallying and they are blocking them off here. But we're sort of collapsing our opponents now. We're able to overrun the backline. You can see the Slayers finally getting mopped up. The Slayers up here finally mopped up, and that is freeing up a whole bunch of units, some pretty healthy white lines. Once again, I'm going to say this again, I think this is where Alariel might come in, and nifty in retrospect, that hindsight, 2020 sort of thing. But we are pushing in, and we are going to be able to start committing absolute brutality on these guys. These Dwarf Rangers trying to flee. They are just barely on the same level as the White Lions, but as they're trying to flee, we are going to be able to cut them off and start massacring them. Of course, Dwarf Rangers are not going to enjoy being caught by the angry White Lions. Honestly, I could have probably just ignored these guys. They aren't that much of a threat, but as you can see, they're actually going to get dragged into melee, and in that situation, they are going to get slaughtered. And you can see their leadership breaks, they crack, and they are going to flee from the field. This is going to then allow me to pivot my troops back, and once these guys are sort of driven off, we will be able to deal with the main line. Here in the back, in the meantime, you can see Teclis diving into these Thunders. Teclis, of course, is not really meant for this stuff, but he does have martial prowess. He does the same thing that all other High Elves kind of have, and he does have Potion of Troy. So we are able to sort of disengage, disentangle ourselves, and after disrupting these Thunders a bit, dive into these Rangers, helping out these White Lions, helping out the Pure Main Company, and slaughtering these filthy Dawi. Teclis, in the meantime, bouncing around, sort of avoiding these enemy troops, trying to shut down the most important targets. And honestly, so the Pure Main Company does have decent stats, 43, 34. With their armor sundering, they're kind of they're making sure that even their non-AP damage does stay in there, doing more damage just because they're debuffing enemy armor by a good bit. You can see these Rangers not having a good time. In the meantime, Teclis shutting down these Thunders, and really at this point it's just a matter of time for my opponent. His Lord is able to beat off some White Lions over there. But really, if we look at the board at this point, we actually chased off those rangers. I actually didn't remember that doing that, but apparently we did chase off those rangers completely until they shattered. Bit of a waste, to be quite frank, but we did. You know, you can see with the breach kind of going out of control here, just the pursuit going in, we are going to be able to chase off all these dwarf troops who are just not fast enough to protect themselves. We can throw things into fast forward a little bit. You can see Teclis there beating the snot out of these thunders, hitting them with his sword, with his mighty blade, because of course Teclis is the greatest warrior the High Elves have ever known. You know, we're able to zone these thunders off, get them off the field. And with that, my opponent's hopes of any sort of victory are basically going to be dashed. He's got no troops left. And now, in the grand finale here, we are going to be able to surround the Lord. We hit him with an enfeebling foe, making him a lot less effective. And at this point, he's simply going to shatter to army losses. Now, if we look at the after battle screen, you can see this is sort of how battles will go against an army like this one, where you've got to plow through a bunch of chaff. And if you don't decide to go with all that tactical of an approach, like myself, you're going to suffer heavy casualties in the process. But it works. If your opponent goes more elite, which some Dwarven players will do, you can still beat them in a straight-up fight. The Swordmasters are just very good. You can, if you're using Teclis, you can get that enfeebling foe to help yourself out. You can get regrowth. You can get stuff like that. You can net them to keep them out of the fight, or at least deny them charge bonus. And the Swordmasters will be doing some monstrous work regardless. You can see this unit here focused out horribly, probably focused out by 3 or 4 units. Yeah, they got nothing done, but it happens. The rest of the army got into close quarters. They started massacring these miners. At that point, you're putting your opponent on a timer. It's a race against time. Can you kill your opponent's front line faster than he can kill your troops? And as you can see, in the end, we did have a few fairly healthy white lions, some pretty beat up white lions who did stick around and were still present to sort of mop up this backline. If I were to do anything different, I obviously would try to defend the backline. The Eagle Claw bolt throwers could have gotten a lot more done throughout the course of that game. They do knock troops around, so they can often disrupt your opponent's firing a bit, just by constantly whittling them down with those volleys of arrows or of bolts. And I would have just tried to defend these guys with a unit of white lines. Like there, I had the unit pivot back, but it was too late to intercept. Honestly, I should have just kept the white lines in the back, ready to go. And then once my opponent started pushing in with the Slayers, we could have just intercepted them, zoned them out. While white lines can't catch Slayers very effectively, they can definitely slow them down. They can definitely sort of mirror them. It's not as uneven of a situation like when you're trying to mirror or screen out cavalry with infantry. Slayers are, of course, not that quick on their feet. And that would have done me some huge favors because the bolt throwers kept... Even if I'd just been able to screen out the Slayers for a little bit, just a little more damage from the bolt throwers would have just shut these thunders down completely, probably. Maybe would have done some good damage to the Rangers. One of the interesting things worth seeing here is that both of these Iron Drakes got overwhelmed pretty quickly, but they still racked up a good amount of kills, 55 and 81, against some pretty high-end, high-elf units. So don't underestimate him. Perhaps in retrospect, honestly, I should have just gone single shot mode and tried to chip away at the Iron Drakes that way. But you know, you live and learn. I'm not really used to seeing Iron Drakes in this matchup, to be quite fair, and I didn't anticipate them doing this much damage, but they definitely did. Nonetheless, I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you found it informative. From a Dwarf player's perspective, this is not a bad build to counter the High Elves. I don't think I would bring Dwarf Warriors with great weapons. I think I'd try to bring perhaps some artillery, some organ guns, especially to counter enemy cavalry more reliably. This build I think would struggle a bit if your opponent went more cavalry heavy. I think it would be worse for you than because your opponent could probably just pile through your backline, especially with Dragon Princes. Dragon Slayers don't really shut down Dragon Princes that hard. You get into the backline, slaughter some Iron Drakes, disrupt everything, and it can get very hairy because you don't really have snares, you don't really have that sort of stuff. But I definitely think this style of build, where you go pretty wide and you've got a lot of interlocking shooting, is definitely not a bad idea against the High Elves. Otherwise, you can go elite with hammers and some gyrocopters and units like that. Nonetheless, good game to my opponent. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe below. If you have any comments, any criticism, any questions, as usual, guys, don't hesitate to mention it down in the comments below. I will do my best to respond as soon as I can. I do thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.